mine mystery. Mr. Duncan, the small controller, had decided to extend the Arlesdale Railway towards Cas-ny-Hawin, specifically the mines around there, the mines that have brought an end to the mid-Sodor. It's been a few months since construction had started, and the rails towards the mine had been completed. It took a year to drain out the remaining water, then another few months to place up some temporary tracks. Mr. Duncan intended to use the blisters to run the mines until he could buy a mine engine. One spooky evening, the construction workers were finishing up when Mike, who had taken them there, saw something in the corner of his eye. He approached what he saw. He saw a building just outside the mine, and there was a rusted boiler there with something that looks like a funnel on top, and a gap in the front of the boiler. However, the gap was too short to be the back of the boiler. Mike was both terrified and curious. Taking a closer examination of these features, he quickly theorized this boiler was once a locomotive, a fate debatably among engines worse than scrap. That night, Mike pulled into the shed, still obviously shaken. Bert and Rex noticed this. "What seems to be the matter?" Bert asked. "Well, I saw something just outside the mine today," replied Mike, clear fear and worry in his voice. "What was it?" asked Rex, obviously teasing Mike for being scared. "I don't know. It seemed to be a locomotive boiler stuffed into a shed." Rex and Bert felt shivers go through their boilers. "How big was it?" Rex asked Mike in fear. "It was too big to be our gauge and too small to be standard gauge. It must have been some sort of locomotive that was stripped of its wheels during the days of the mid-Sodor." "Duke would know what it was." "Well, if we can get that boiler out and Duke to see it, he could tell us who this boiler was," Mike suggested. "That would require a lot of secretive work. If it gets out, I'd rather not be found to be a part of tearing a boiler out of an old shed and hiding it," Bert reluctantly claimed. "If you don't want to be a part of the great mystery of a locomotive, then me and Rex will," said Mike. "What's the plan?" asked Rex, as Bert tried to force himself to sleep. "We must convince our crew to do this. Then we must convince some of the workers." Bert, who was still trying to sleep, overheard his plan, finding it rather absurd. Over the next few months, Mike and Rex were able to convince enough people to pull their plan off. One dark night, when Bert was asleep, they put their plan into action. Mike took a crane and flatbed, as Rex took some trucks filled with workmen. When they reached the mine, they brought the boiler out. The boiler was far too rusted to make out the colour, as it was put on the flatbed. A workman found a few pieces, of which would have been pieces of the smoke box door. They brought the boiler back to the Arlesdale shed, not knowing where to hide it. They went down a line and put it in a siding. The next morning, Mr. Duncan arrived to tell Mike, Rex and Bert their jobs, when Mike quickly interrupted the small controller. "Sir, can I go to the Scarlowy Railway today with some special cargo?" Mike asked. "Whatever for?" asked Mr. Duncan. "Well, me and Rex got something yesterday." "What was it?" Mike told Rex to go and fetch the boiler. Rex quickly returned, pulling up into the shed. "You actually went through with the plan?" exclaimed Bert in shock. "You were on in this too?" "No, I overheard their plan when Mike was putting it together months ago," replied Bert. "So it was your idea to get this boiler, Mike?" "Yes, sir, it was. Have a look at the features. Doesn't it have locomotive details?" Mr. Duncan looked over the boiler before agreeing with Mike. "Yes, it does. I see why." "You wanted to speak with Duke to see what it was?" "Yes. I'll see if Mr. Percival can bring Duke here. For now, keep the boiler out of public sight. We don't want questions on what we're doing with it." Yes, sir, said Rex, as he steamed away to hide the boiler. A few weeks went by until the Arzale Railway had a big surprise. Duke was brought alongside the station platform, being pulled on a flatbed by Duck. The news quickly spread as Struck, Frank, Sigrid of Arzale, Blister 1 and Blister 2 quickly arrived with many tourists and passengers, taking photos of Duke.
"I hear you ordered me, Mike,"
said Duke. Yes, give us a moment. Rex quickly went to retrieve the boiler. When he brought it up alongside Duke, Duke was less than pleased.
"I was expecting something important,"
said Duke. We found it just outside the Cas-ny-Hawin mines, mostly in a shed, but slightly sticking out. Do you know anything on it, given the mines was part of the mid-Sodor at some point? Duke's face of displeasure quickly dropped to sadness.
"That,"
said Duke,
"is number 2, nicknamed Stanley. He was an American locomotive and the second locomotive on the line. He often rode rough and often came off the rails. He was turned into a pumping engine at the back of our shed, then was later moved to the mines at Cas-ny-Hawin. Unfortunately, he failed, flooding the mines and destroying himself in the process. The shed must have protected most of his boiler from the pressure, but I'm surprised at how much was able to survive. The damage isn't as bad as one would think. However, due to the missing smoke box door, I'm afraid to say he is dead."
The engines and everyone there fell into mourn, as the boiler was loaded onto a second flatbed Duck had pulled. Once Duke had said his goodbyes, Duck, Duke and Stanley's boiler went back to the Scarlowy Railway. A fire was lit that night, where the remains of Stanley's boiler were melted down, and what survived was placed underground near Crovan's Gate, with a gravestone for Stanley, the American engine.